So have you ever just sat back in an air-conditioned room, maybe swiping on a smartphone, and thought to yourself, how in the world did we actually get here? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a time-traveling journey to see exactly how early humans went from literally fighting for survival in the wild all the way to building the massive modern cities we live in today. Every single stage of human development is intimately connected. We're going to look at this spectacular chain of events. Honestly, it's a literal domino effect that completely transformed us. Stick with me because at every single stage, the human brain pulled off some absolute miracles that are just going to amaze you.
I mean, try to imagine a world where you literally have nothing. No shelter, no spoken language, and not even a tiny spark of fire to keep you warm at night. The gap between that brutal, harsh reality and our current, comfortable modern lives seems almost impossible to cross, right? But as we retrace our steps along this evolutionary path, you'll see it was actually just a series of ingenious, and sometimes totally accidental, steps that paved the way.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the first human ancestors. Millions of years ago, shifting environments actually forced our ape-like ancestors out of the trees and onto the ground. So mapping out this biological leap, it started with Australopithecus. They looked very ape-like but had begun to walk on two legs. Then, a massive evolutionary jump gave us Homo habilis. They're often called the handyman because for the very first time in history, they actually started crafting stone tools. Next up in line was Homo erectus, who achieved a fully upright posture. And finally, after all of that, came Homo sapiens. That translates to wise man. And yep, that's us. We arrived on the scene with a highly developed brain, ready to take on a pretty unforgiving natural world.
Now this right here is the ultimate evolutionary domino. Walking on two legs freed up our hands, and honestly, this is everything. Because we no longer needed our hands just to move around, we could use them to hold things, carry food back to our groups, and eventually create tools. Without this one fundamental physical shift, we absolutely wouldn't have architecture, engineering, or technology today. The rest of human civilization simply does not happen without this very first step.
Moving right along to Section 2, we hit the Paleolithic Age and the discovery of fire.
The Paleolithic Age was a harsh, brutal era. Early humans were basically just nomadic hunters and gatherers, and their only goal, day in and day out, was to find food and just stay alive. Imagine relying on tools so rough and unrefined. They didn't have advanced sharpening techniques yet, so it took massive, exhausting physical effort to repeatedly smash heavy stones together until a jagged edge finally formed. They were relying on these really crude hand axes and scrapers just to scrape by against much faster, deadlier predators. But then, the accidental discovery of fire completely flipped human existence upside down. Think about the sheer difference between life before and after fire. Escaping the freezing cold and keeping dangerous animals away from the camps at night was huge, obviously. But the real game changer was the food. Instead of chewing on tough, raw meat all day, they cooked it. And here's a totally fascinating biological twist. Because they no longer had to spend hours tearing apart that raw meat, human jaw muscles physically shrank. That extra space literally allowed the skull to accommodate a much larger brain. So eating cooked food directly accelerated our cognitive evolution. How wild is that?
Which brings us to Section 3, Mesolithic Tools and Domestication. As the Ice Age finally ended and the Earth warmed up, new grasses grew, and smaller, way faster animals appeared. Those big, clunky stones from before, they were no longer efficient for hunting. So, to adapt, humans invented microliths. These were small, highly sharpened stone points. By tying these deadly, precise little points to the ends of wood or bone, humans essentially invented the very first spears and arrows. It was an absolute revolution in hunting efficiency.
But they didn't just hunt animals anymore. They actually started living with them. It's kind of hilarious when you think about it. Our fierce, survival-hardened ancestors basically bribed terrifying wild wolves with leftover dinner scraps. Humans quickly realized these animals could be incredibly helpful for tracking and hunting. So the wild dog became our very first domesticated companion. And once they realized the sheer power of domestication, humans started herding sheep and goats, securing a totally reliable food supply that didn't require constant dangerous hunting trips.
Next up is Section 4, the Agricultural Revolution. Okay, if fire was a miracle, agriculture rewrote the history books entirely. It's a pretty incredible cause and effect chain. Humans eventually figured out that by planting seeds themselves, they could transition from being just food gatherers to active food producers. But here's the catch. Crops take months to grow. You can't just plant a field and walk away, right? This forced a massive psychological and physical shift.
Humans went from wandering around looking for food to being anchored caretakers of the land. They had to build permanent huts. And that single realization led directly to the birth of settled life and the very first human villages. With this settled life came a massive burst of stability and invention. Let's look at 3 major leaps. First, you have the wheel, which instantly revolutionized transport and how far goods could travel. Next up, the potter's wheel. Since farming meant they had extra food, they needed strong clay pots to actually store it. And finally, humans dug into the earth and found copper, ushering in the Chalcolithic Age. They replaced those easily broken rocks with a strong, durable metal, and that effectively ended the Stone Age forever.
And that sets the stage perfectly for Section 5, the rise of river civilizations.
So how exactly did simple farming villages transform into massive, complex civilizations? Well, as agriculture boomed, populations absolutely exploded. People naturally flocked to where survival was the easiest, and that meant the river valleys. If you trace the origins of the Indus Valley, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Chinese civilizations, the logic is exactly the same. Rivers provided perfectly fertile soil, instantly accessible drinking water, and incredibly smooth transport for trade. These riverbanks literally became the cradles of the early world.
Now, here is what happens when a society hits the ultimate milestone, a food surplus. Because farming near these rivers was so incredibly productive, they had a surplus of calories, meaning not everyone had to be a farmer anymore. This was a magic key that unlocked human potential, creating what we call a division of labor. So while some people farmed, others finally had the freedom to become expert potters, highly skilled weavers, and wide-ranging traders. Of course, this new, complex web of dense city living created entirely new problems that required ingenious solutions. When trade exploded, merchants couldn't simply memorize every single transaction anymore. They needed permanent records, and that directly forced the invention of writing systems. When thousands of people gathered in these massive cities, things naturally got a bit chaotic, so administration formed to manage it all. And to maintain an organized society, formalized laws were created. Writing, administration, laws. This right here is the very definition of a true civilization.
It really is an unbelievable journey, isn't it? Going from smashing rocks together in the freezing cold to writing down laws in bustling river cities. Before we end this explainer, I want to leave you with one mind-bending thought to ponder. Think back to that very first evolutionary domino we talked about. If that early ancestor hadn't come down from the trees and learned to balance on 2 legs, freeing up their hands to shape the world, would we still be wandering the wilderness today, scavenging for raw food in the dirt? It really makes you appreciate every single step of the journey that got us here. Thanks for exploring all of this with me, and keep questioning the history that surrounds us.